coming up next. He's based on Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, but today he is on supply chain leadership activities in Riverside, California. And I'm talking about the great Jim Vries. Jim is with us to talk about achieving supply chain control through end-to-end visibility. Jim, please go ahead and turn on your camera as I introduce you, give you a little bit of background to the audience about you. Jim has served as a resilient enterprise executive leader and advisor for companies ranging from startups to Fortune 50 organizations. He has held operational excellence, sales, and supply chain leadership positions in leading global companies in the chemicals industry with Air Products and Chemicals, in energy with General Electric Energy, security, Tyco ADT, and supply chain with C.H. Robinson. Throughout his career, he has developed and refined resilient enterprise ecosystems to accelerate digital transformation, innovation, leadership development, and strategy execution, and value creation globally. He believes that people make a difference, and that it is harnessing people's talent that companies can become resilient. Jim, it's always a pleasure to learn and share with you. Thank you for taking the time to share expertise with our global audience today.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And I'm very honored to be here this morning. And I'm looking forward to a really engaging discussion and good questions at the end. Please do document them. So today we're going to talk about achieving supply chain control through end-to-end visibility. Of course, as Jose said, people, process, data, technology, it's all of these that come together. And it's through this visibility that really drives our ability to control our supply chain. So we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of end-to-end supply chain data visibility, creating some robust supply chain capabilities, some basics, and then we'll get into, from a risk management perspective, our supply chain risk model that Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium and has developed, and what we've developed from a risk appetite and operational propensity. So we're going to bring you through supply chain and supply chain risk management during this webinar. So very excited to be here. So some of the key learnings today will be, again, these end-to-end tools and techniques. We'll talk about the W recovery that we announced at the onset of this. We are living that W recovery. And then we'll talk about some of the tools that we have out there. And at the end of the day, we have to understand we all are one global ecosystem. I think some folks say we'd like to be only within the borders of the US, but in essence, we are global, regardless of the geopolitical challenges that we have right now. So this is our go-to slide from a strategy to execution perspective. And the EIG, which is a group of 50 consulting companies and SaaS providers, are here to hone companies' performance in these areas. So we got strategy, supply chain risk and resiliency, priorities, intrinsic value, and operating structure. And this runs at a cadence. It's a little bit slower in the company, but needs to connect to the execution arm of what we talk about when we talk about supply chain management. When we talk about supply chain management, it all starts with visibility, operational risk management, and enterprise risk and resiliency. So we start with visibility. If you can't see it, you can't deal with it. So what have we seen? On the onset of this pandemic, a lot of people said, oh, we're going to be able to make, we're going to be able to react to this. So what did people plan to do in 2020, and what did they end up doing 12 months afterwards? So this survey from our friends at McKinsey, that it's a little bit dated, but it still really zeroes in on what we're doing and what we're not doing. So are we increasing inventory of critical products? Well, we plan to do that, but actually we're increasing our inventories. And it's a real challenge here because we don't want to run dry. So our supply chains are bulging. And we all said, oh, we want to do dual sourcing, but doing dual sourcing takes time to set up a supplier. Not saying you shouldn't be doing it, but if you haven't done it yet, you better be doing it now, and you better be looking for something a little bit closer to home, because we all know the world right now is turning inward, and therefore our supply chains need second sources, and they need to be closer to home. As far as increasing inventory along the supply chain, we're seeing a lot of bulges in the supply chain, and then of course regionalizing the supply chain. So we can go through all these, but the bottom line is some of these, especially the ones in blacks, are much harder to do than we would like to think, and our supply chains have been bulging, and that kind of gets us right into the cartoon or the neural network model that we put together, and that is, it's like a balloon. The supply chain is like a balloon. Everybody's squeezing on it in different places. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but everybody has a piece in this. So the customer's hanging on, and our suppliers are hanging on at the other end of the balloon. So, you may optimize your particular area, like the lady and the gentleman in the center, but they may be happy, but everybody around them is a little bit frustrated. And finance is sitting there holding on to dear life and saying, why are my costs going out of control? Why can't we deliver? And our customer people are saying, why can't we deliver? And inflation's going up, and our sales aren't hitting what we expected to, but our orders are increasing, and everybody's kind of a little bit frustrated. So if you can relate to that, that's what's happening due to this, what we call the bullwhip effect, that we'll get to in just a minute. So as it says here, the C-suite is a bundle of nerves this winter. The new survey shows that 72% of CEOs are worried about losing their jobs. Why? Because of business disruptions. They're tracking closely with the 94% of the bosses that say that the corporate models need to be overhauled within 3 years. So it's broken supply chains. So we try to do just in time, and we try to lean out everything and cut costs, and that works when everything is nice and smooth. But as soon as you have a disruption, you're going to have challenges. On top of that, we have trouble hiring workers and workers to stay with us. And then our IT networks aren't really built for supply chain. Most ERPs were built for finance, accounting. They weren't built for supply chains. So activity-based costing is not something that you're going to find in many ERPs. It's starting to today, and a lot of hyper automation and different tools that are out there that you hear about in these couple days with UiPath and so forth, give us the ability to see things much differently. So we need to make this data visible and repeatable. So there's fantastic tools out there, better tools than we've ever had, to be able to battle this particular issue. So just getting back to basics, supply chain operational reference model. If you and everybody in your company should understand this model. We are all intrinsically linked together, as we mentioned earlier, and we need to plan. You see, plan sitting on top. A lot of people don't want to plan. They want to execute. No plan, no execute. Well, if you don't plan, your execution, your chains are going to fall apart. They're going to break. And just like we saw the bicycle at the top of this webinar, your chains are going to allow you to deliver your product to your customers. And you really have to be thinking about beyond the four walls of your company. You have to be looking up and down the supply chain. A lot of people look only at the procurement side, but don't look at the customer side. Or folks are focused on the customer side and not the procurement side. We really need to be looking at both of those sides. And the supply chain operational reference model, which was developed by the Supply Chain Council in the early 2000s, is fantastic. It's a fantastic tool. It's fairly inexpensive by ASCM, and it's out there for you. And I would highly recommend, if you're not doing that, as well as CSMP with ASCM, to get certified. And it's not just, we have to define supply chain as, it's not supply only. It's source, which is supply, make, which is your production, and deliver to your customers and return. So even though we use the word supply chain, because the people who created this model were mainly procurement people, they kind of won out, but it really encompasses all of those processes. And of course, planning and linking from a strategic to a tactical to an operational windows. If you cannot link those windows together, you're going to have inventory going out of control. And when you talk about the four walls, there's all these different areas, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide, but it's important that everybody knows their role in managing that supply chain, from engineering to production planning, of course, and scheduling, to management decision support, product service, customer support, distribution, order fulfillment, logistics, and supplier management. Some of these are synonymous with supply chain. Some you may not think of product service as part of the supply chain, but it is. It absolutely is. So think of it as end-to-end of the value stream that runs your company, that produces the widgets that drives your earnings to the bottom line. So let's talk a little bit about some robust supply chain capabilities. We're going to start with the bullwhip effect, which is a classic something that you learn in supply chain. And as it says there, the bullwhip effect is the uncertainty caused from distorted information flowing up and down the supply chain. So you said, what did we expect to happen and what actually happened? So any uncertainty is caused by distorted information flowing up and down the supply chain is going to cause you pain. And so we can look at the demand side and any perturbation from the customer in demand. So if they over order or under order, or the timeliness is not ordering at the same time as they always did, then you're going to get slugs. And those slugs are going to turn to the retailer, to the wholesaler, to the manufacturer, to the supplier, and it's going to perturbate. And it's get bigger and bigger and bigger to the supplier. So everybody starts chasing their tail. That's on the demand side. On the supply side, it can happen the same way, where you have distortion relevant information and distortions to relevant materials. So from the foundry or from raw materials, you should say, all the way to hitting the OEM that's building the product, and from the OEM the other direction. So what happens is in supply chain risk management, we talk about, oh, there's a hurricane that came by, we had a fire, we had a portage closure, the ship gets stuck in a canal, we're not making the right number of microchips. All those are one-sided. And in the past, we could deal with them. But what COVID has done is disrupted both sides. So now you're not talking about a disruption of only on one side. We're talking about disruptions on both sides. So that's what's happening today. That's so unique, and that has caused that ripple effect up and down the supply chain. And that's why we called it the W recovery, where you're going to have times of good and times of bad. And right now, obviously, we're in that peak right now of everything hitting that, hopefully the peak. People say, is there going to be a bigger peak yet? That's the $1 million question, or we have to say now $1 trillion question. And now we're at that W recovery. So you're having these oscillations and they're not lining up. So the retailer, the wholesaler and distributors, supply chains are now misaligned, which is causing these perturbations up and down the supply chain. And so people are going to start hoarding, and we end up with way too much material. And right now in the US, for a lot of manufacturers, there's pent-up demand with not the ability to get the materials over here from the ships. The ports are all full. So if you remember about 6 or 8 months ago, there was a containers. We had too many empty containers. Now we can't find a container. So if you remember about a year ago, there were containers you could buy very cheap. Now a container is $10,000. Before it was $200, so, or $20,000. So because we didn't know where to put those containers because of that disruption. So we just had a recent webinar just last week, and we asked what are the challenges in managing the bullwhip effect, and not surprisingly, the folks there came up with these, and we were just talking about it: the demand, uneven demand, and uneven supply. So it's that bullwhip effect. And we can look at some of these other things that the folks brought up. It's not overreacting. There's people overreacting to these things. There's changes, distortions, having skilled staff to be able to deal with these types of situations. And we all turn into expediters, and we overreact. And remember, people do remember if you do overreact. So these are some of the things that different folks were dealing with that brought up during the webinar just last week on this particular topic. I thought I'd share that with you. The next thing is what we've come up with is a supply chain management readiness assessment. We didn't come up with this yesterday. We came up with this 12 years ago with the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium, one of EIG's partners, longest partners. And the consortium came up with this survey about 12 years ago and has been using it in their education courses, and has a large benchmark of data where we can do benchmarking. We'll be offering this available online in the next couple of weeks, so that for free you can go and perform this assessment on these 13 manufacturing tenants. And again, this is based on supply chain management and not supply chain risk management. And we have both a services perspective as well as a manufacturer. We work with a lot of NGOs, so the consortium does. So by performing this, we can ask, are you best in class? So the green is best in class, smaller is better here. And then the gold is you're on your way, and the red is getting started, or fire, your hair's on fire probably if you're operating in that area. So this is a quick assessment. It's free. It can tell you what tenants that you're good at, what tenants you're bad at. Of course, it's all about you're only as good as your weakest link. So we do believe in TOC basics, theory of constraints. So this can at least give you a little bit of guidance. Are you on the right track from a supply chain management perspective? So there are tools like this. We're not the only ones. There's lots of tools out there on the market. Very encourage you to complete these type of surveys to make sure that you understand where you're at, so you know where you're going. So just to change pace just a little bit, going back to the W recovery and the 3 R's, we came up with this chart, and we said that in the W recovery, there's going to be 3 R's. How you respond, are you going to be in the recovery mode, or are you in the renew mode on the bottom of the screen? So you're going to have a supply demand imbalance. You're either going to be oversupply down here, and under demand, or over demand and under supply. So we're going to be going through these perturbations quite a bit. And this is the perfect time to clean up your portfolio, take out those SKUs that are no longer good, that aren't yielding good margins and low volumes, rescale your supply chain, make it work for you, look at new channels and reinvent. So the bottom line is the companies that are able to get to renew the fastest, and the only way to get there is to, reduce your portfolio, rescale, reinvent your portfolio, and look at new channels, are the companies that are going to gain their unfair market share. So there's some companies that thrive on disruption, thrive on it, and they will be gobbling up market share through this pandemic as these perturbations continue, because they have complete visibility in their supply chain. They have the control tower look. They have their risk management in place. and they are looking at risk and able to act and react to risk faster than the nearest competitor. And that's going to make or break companies. And what we find is every company has in the order of 11 or 12 risk events a year. This is pre-pandemic, and each risk event is costing the company to the bottom line $350,000 at least. So you're talking in the order of $2 million that you're gonna, $2 to $3 million that you're gonna lose off your bottom line. And we'll be going to the quarterly meetings and saying, gee, that was a one-off event, it will never happen again. Well, those one-off events are the things that you really need to be focused on and preventing as soon as possible so that you can gain your unfair market share. So it's easy to say, it's harder to do, and that's why we've brought these different tools for you. So we start off with our 21st century supply chain risk and resiliency model. And in this model, we talk about on the x-axis here, foundational, these stages: foundational, visibility, sense and respond, risk management, and sustain. So if you can't see it, you can't react. So where are you today and where do you want to be? So you may be in visibility, you may be in foundational, you may be in predictability. There's no right or wrong, it's just where you are and what are you doing about it. So we encourage you to assess where you are on that continuum so you can start building your improvements. And our mantra is identify those threats, assess them, mitigate, and manage. So that's the cycle you'll be going through all the way until you get sustained. So people ask, how long does it take to get through this? Well, there's companies that have been doing this for over 20 years, the exemplars, and like Zara and so forth, and these companies, Cisco, and so these companies have been doing it for over 20 years, and they're still working at it. And so it's not something you just do and say, oh, we're going to do it and leave. It's something that you need to be committed. And there's many different elements of that, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But that's the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium's risk and resiliency maturity model, and it served us well. We've been using it for over 10 years with different clients. So I understand that this webinar series is about people and process. So we thought we would try to incorporate some risk appetite and operational propensity. And we'll talk about that. And these are more things that are a little bit more touchy-feely. So unlike supply chain risk management is a lot about your risk appetite. How are you going to view risks? Do you look at risk as an opportunity here, or do you look at risk as something you avert? So when there's a risk event, does everybody run for the hills, or does everybody look at, oh wow, if we could turn this around, we could actually beat our competitor? So over 10 years of surveys and customer coaching sessions, the consortium has developed it into these 4 different risk perspectives: the pragmatist, the conservators, the managers, and the maximizers. So let's look at each one of these. So the pragmatists, they wait to the last minute. So on the x-axis, you see risk management decision tactics. So these are folks that either do nothing or they wait to the very, very last minute to make a decision on a risk event. So then the second is conservators. So they're concerned about avoiding a loss, and they need to be very careful to avoid the risk to the bottom line. So they don't wait to the very last minute, but they try to they're moving to that steering in that middle area. They're trying to move themselves into that. So they're still looking at risk as something they want to avert and minimize, but they don't want to take it on. So those companies that are conservators, and generally the heavy industries tend to be more pragmatists and conservators. than managers. So managers are the ones that like to try to balance risk and reward. So they say, well, yeah, there's a trade-off. And they're starting to look at, they're able to say in their meetings, red is good. They like dashboards where there's red. Conservators don't like dashboards with any red. Pragmatists don't have dashboards, or they ignore them. They don't run by those. They run by their guts. So managers are very visible, and I'm not saying conservators couldn't be visible and they can't indoctrinate the visibility, but generally they don't. Pragmatists can be visible, as you see on the left side, but when they move that way to the left, they're actually taking on more and more risk. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But the managers are the folks that are the companies that are trying to take on risk and look at it, risk rewards. The maximizers are the ones that are just taking off. They're looking at every risk event as an opportunity, and they're gobbling up market share and every perturbation. So you'll see the Teslas, you'll see the big electronics companies, some of them, they'll be looking at these and saying, oh man, another risk event, who's going to go down, and I can go buy them because they're going to go under. So understanding who you are, it's not that it's bad to be a conservative or a pragmatist. So I don't want to come across, it is who you are, and you have to manage who you are and understand your limitations, and then try to manage your risk events going forward. So that's a little bit about risk decision tactics. And then as we go, the third graph that we do in our survey is what we call operational propensity. And we call this the kite. What's the shape of your kite? And there are 4 different endpoints there. So we have, you can be bureaucratic, you could be trapped or clannish. Some people don't like the word trapped. Opposite of clannish maybe is startup. And then the fourth is agile. So you'll see that being bureaucratic and agile are opposite. So if you will often ask, what is the long pole in the tent? We'll put that at the bottom. In this particular case, they tend to be clannish a bit. That means each organization has its own little fiefdom, so to speak. And bureaucratic means it just takes a lot of layers of management. And agile, of course, is what we all talk about, be able to make agile decisions. And startup is you're starting up with new businesses all the time. And so again, there could be a box kite that a kite that is longer here and these shorter on these 2 ends, and vice versa. So again, there's no right or wrong. It's just trying to say how do you operate? What's the shape of your kite? So that's a pretty neat tool that we look at. So we ask questions, about 100 question survey, and we'll create your persona. So each company has its own persona. So in this particular case, this example is they have visibility, they have they're a prag conservator, and they're a box kite, a clannish box kite. So from what that means is to say, when we did the survey and we asked them what was their feedback, and they said, yeah, we're at the beginning of our visibility stage, in the middle of that. We're a global company. We have a single instance of SAP, and we're looking to achieve sustainability as soon as we can. From a risk appetite perspective, they're saying, yeah, we're pretty risk averse to make decisions. We want to work, but we want to work better together across our divisions. So we're trying to move more to the right to make decisions. We just sponsored a new supply chain risk and resiliency executive position, and we're moving into the less risk averse culture, but we're reactionary. We do wait till the last minute, and there's a strong urgency to change this approach. So it resonated with them as a mirror of who they are. And then they said, yeah, we're very bureaucratic and looking to change. Our data is siloed, making it difficult, and we are looking to be more well-rounded, agile. So this helps us provide for each of the clients their persona action plan. And for them, we just said, you know, again, you need to identify all your existing risks in your end-to-end supply chain, as we talked about before, meaning you're going to map and manually map your supply chain manually and or digitally. And you want to identify, of course, those key suppliers. And you want to do an Altman Z score, which is a solvency test for your suppliers, and customers for that matter. Who's going to pay? What's the likelihood they're going to withstand the pandemic? And then you want to start using some of the basics of supply chain risk management, risk priority, value at risk, time to recovery, and time to impact. And then you want to subscribe to some kind of risk alert system and integrate that into how you make decisions today, and then build a digital twin for your product line. So that gives you a little bit of a taste of what we're talking about, the consortium in building a action plan that is doable and manageable in the next 90 days. So, and a lot of folks will say, you know, where's the money? Everybody's asking where the money is. And so some of the places where the money can be for supply chain risk management is cost reduction. And you can see that in insurance premiums. We work very closely with insurance companies, and they very much like to see companies adopt supply chain risk management. Of course, that reduces the risk of having an event and a claim. And then through automated workflow of being able to make decisions more efficiently and effective, we've seen cost reductions in the order of 10%. Cost avoidance, of course, you know, putting in effective and risk detection and assessments, you can easily see 17% in cost avoidance if you think that's important. And I think as inflation rises, cost avoidance becomes more and more relevant. And so we'll see more and more emphasis on that. Working capital, again, cash flow, 95% of cash flow forecasting, you know, achieving that kind of level, freeing up your cash is another big piece of the puzzle. And cash conversion cycle, you know, we don't normally see 10 to 20%. And the Altman Z score. So again, we've been working the consortium has been working for over, you know, 12 years in the field and in this area. And as the founder, Greg Schagel, always says, think big, start small, and act fast. So just like any other thing, do your POC, your proof of concept, and build it out from there. So that kind of concludes the webinar from what I had to cover. So that leaves us lots of time to ask questions. I put together this presentation this morning about 3 hours ago. So hopefully you found that interesting. And Jose, open it up for questions.
Excellent, Jim. And that's what you get from industry leaders. You don't get a presentation from a year ago that they presented, because this industry is moving at incredible pace, and you're getting the latest from this cross-industry leaders here through Supply Chain Planning Live. Outstanding presentation, Jim. Have several questions related to the topic, so I'm going to ask you to stop showing your presentation screen to the audience so I can bring my camera back on. And then we can go on with the Q&A here. So I'm opening up the questions box here in my monitor. So please make sure that you ask additional questions to Jim, to your context. What are the struggles that you're having? What are the obstacles and opportunities that you have in your supply chains, and how you are how you can benefit from the information that that Jim has shared with us here. Now, Jim, one of the concepts that has come up, I mean, you talked a lot about a lot of different concepts, because, you know, supply chain is a cross-functional, multi-concept discipline. But one that resonated with the audience was this concept of being risk aware versus risk averse, and the different types of leaders, or maybe personas that you have in the business. You know, you talked about the manager and the maximizer. You had a comment in that chart that was related to titles and positions in the organization. What do you find to be the relative risk awareness and risk aversion built based on titles in organizations? Does it get more or less as you go up and down? Talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's funny when you talk about risk. It's a great question, and you know, as you always say, there's two reasons that control your risk appetite. One is, what job do you currently have in the company, and what have been your experiences in risk? So if you had a bad risk event in your life, then you're going to remember that. But depending on where you are in the organization, if you're in finance now and you used to be, you know, out in the field, a controller, or you're in a supply chain role and you used to be in sales or whatever it could be, or procurement, maybe your procurement went into sales, but it's where your job is, which is going to give you the most interesting perspective. And what we find is, when we do our assessments, we ask that we gain the perspective of all those leaders, sales to procurement to engineering, technology, production. We want all of those people to provide how they view risk in their company and how they're managing it in order to complete this. So it's not the traditional supply chain manager person filling this out. We need that cross-functional team of your organization on how you make risk decisions, which is everybody across the organization. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I just have a follow-up on that. Curious about, what do you see in terms of these different roles? Like, for example, I expect folks in finance to be naturally more like risk averse, because, you know, their job is to control the numbers. They don't sometimes really know what's going on in operations. While someone in maybe in business development may be more risk aware and maybe more of a risk taker. And I'm curious, so there's that on functions, but what do you see in terms of ranking the organization? Does risk awareness and risk management gets better or worse as you get higher and lower in the organization from a hierarchy perspective?
It's funny. That's a hard one. I think that's, I'd be scared to put it in generalities, but I guess if you would have to say, as you rise in the organization, you tend to protect. It's just our natural instincts. And so I think what happens as you get to the executive level, if you are very segmented and siloed organization, you're going to protect your fiefdom, your pillar of power, as we often say. And so they tend to be more risk averse than the people who can see what's actually happening day to day. They tend to want to take more risks. But depending on how bureaucratic the company is and how hard it is to make decisions, the people that actually could take the risk in a managed way don't have the power to do so. So it's not a really easy answer to provide, because in an agile company, those people would be making those decisions and taking the risk. In a bureaucratic company, they will have thrown up their arms and say, I can't do anything, I give up. So it's not a one size fits all, but a great question. I don't know if that answered what you were looking for.
No, I love that insight. I think you encapsulated it very well. First of all, there is no simple answer to that question. I think you, as you said, it's very context specific and cultural specific, and because you're going to see CEOs who are incredibly risk aware, and they're taking and they're managing risk very well, and they're actually gaining incredible value by managing risk better than others, because that's the ultimate goal, right? It's not to avoid the risk, but manage risk in a way that gives you a competitive advantage. And then the flip side of that is that you have that hierarchical leader who got there by doing the politics and by doing all those little basic things right, and now he's protecting or she's protecting their turf at that top, and they become incredibly they have a high risk avoidance because they're just kind of managing their position, and you see that out there in the marketplace in in the fairly even distributions, I would say. So so let me migrate to something else. Lots of by the way, good questions coming in. I'm going to try to get to as many as them as possible. But let's talk about lean for a little bit. I know you have tremendous expertise in lean. We have great practitioners who are on this call as well, who have supply chain end-to-end, knowledge. And lean can be looked at as the savior or the villain for what's happening right now, because we created this incredible efficient supply chains with just in time. And we seem to have forgotten that one of the concepts of lean was dealing with variable demand and variable supply. So we selectively picked efficiency and flow, and we forgot about variable demand and variable supply. So for those of us who understand that variable demand and variable supply should be a component of your lean processes and systems. Absolutely. Tell me a little bit more about that. You talked, of course, during the presentation about variable demand and variable supply, but how can a lean system absorb this variable demand and variable supply? What role does that play in the planning for supply chain?
Well, I don't know if it feels like you almost answered it in the question, because in lean, in Deming, you go back to Deming, variation is it's one of his tenets. So if you're of that nature, then you should always be looking at the difference between what did you plan to do and what you actually did, right? And constantly questioning yourself on how to optimize that difference and build risk mitigation strategies around that. And when you do that, you can lean out your system, so to speak, from that perspective, but always looking at that, the difference between, that's the short answer to your question. Is that okay, or you want more?
That's a good answer, because I want to move on to what Karen Kirby is asking about next, which is about technology. And you and I both know that great technologies are awesome because they can speed up the processes. They can make your end-to-end supply chain visibility and control, like digital twins you just mentioned, can be great. But the wrong technologies also can make stupid happen at the speed of light. So the question for you is, what do you see out there right now in supply chain that's just downright stupid and that downright good? What is the difference between stupid and good out there right now that people are using on supply chain from a technology perspective?
I think my biggest red flag in supply chain is having a structured ERP that tells you what your process is because it's best in class, but it doesn't fit your market. And then you implement the ERP according to the ERP constraints, and you're not able to serve your market and the flexibility of the market, because you're only as good as your nearest competitors. So if your competitors are providing and you're not, and you indoctrinate an ERP that doesn't give you that flexibility to meet that market and supplier requirements, then you've made a big mistake. Now, the way to get around that, of course, is all these, I call them wrapper softwares on hyper automation that you can, put on top. You can get the ERP, and then if you map your processes truly end to end, the way that they are and the way they ought to be, and then if there are things in the ERP, which we do need an ERP, I'm not saying we don't, that you can use hyper automation, RPA, these digital twins, and a lot of different technology to cover up for that. But my big thing is always understand the process, understand the variations in your process like we just discussed, and work to optimize that. And the supply demand process and the tactical planning is the most overlooked area in most companies, which drives the inventory out of control. So without a good supply demand planning module that is always looking at it and optimizing it, you're going to be in trouble. I don't know if that answers that or not.
That is a great answer. Listen, that topic right there on ERP and automation is something that we can discuss for an entire 8 hours. So you've done a great job in summarizing that for us. Our next section as well is going to be with the leader of industry solutions and automation for UiPath, which is doing a lot of the robotics process automation and the ERP systems kind of like combined work. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into this topic next. But Jim, I want to thank you in the behalf of our global audience. I know it's super early in California. You're always a thought and industry leader for this global audience, and we are very much appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom and expertise with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. And everybody have a great and blessed day. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Jim Vries right there. He is the managing partner for the Enhance International Group, one of the top advisors for supply chain improvements and innovations with over 3 decades of cross-industry experiences, and sharing that experience and know-how with us directly. We're going to be taking a break now, and we're going to be switching to the next 2 topics will be intelligent automation and supply chain and culture for transformation. So next, we're going to be welcoming Shibaji Das, who is the Senior Director of Industry Solutions for UiPath, who is deploying robotics process automation at scale across thousands of organizations worldwide. Shibaji is going to be sharing with us how automation is bringing value to supply chain management today, how intelligent automation is creating value for all stakeholders. So we're going to take a deep dive on that on the next segment. Take a break now. Say hello to the folks who are putting the updates on LinkedIn. Look under my name, Jose Perez, on LinkedIn, and you're going to see the post for this conference. Have updates from Ron Crabtree and Jim Vries, who just presented here. Say hello to them, say thanks to them directly, and you can connect with them directly by clicking on that LinkedIn post and looking at their direct connection. So for now, take a break. We'll see you back at the top of the hour with UiPath.